1997, Irena Martinez, a female USPS driver from the Rio Grande Valley, vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be a regular Saturday delivery route. 7 years later, when the city began draining the long overdue canal for maintenance, a worker uncovered something unexpected from the muck, a discovery that would change everything and haunt her loved ones forever. The morning sun cast long shadows over the Rio Grande Valley as Irena adjusted her USPS cap and slid into her delivery truck. Her blue uniform clung to her in the sweltering Texas heat, a uniform she'd worn every day for 7 years, ever since her sister Colby had disappeared. Today, the weight of those 7 years felt heavier than usual. It had been 7 long years since Colby had vanished on that fateful Saturday, leaving nothing behind but an empty house and an aching void of unanswered questions. Irena checked her route sheet clipped to the dashboard, started her engine, and pulled out of the depot parking lot. Irena thought back to the days before the disappearance, back when both she and Colby worked part-time as USPS drivers while attending college. They'd shared everything: the small house they inherited from their parents after the car accident, their dreams of better careers, and even their matching bicycles for the neighborhood routes when the weather was nice. But Colby had been the ambitious one, excelling in her nursing program while Irena struggled with her business courses. She was just 2 semesters away from graduation when she vanished, her future filled with plans to move in with Robbie and start a family. The radio crackled, pulling Irena from her thoughts. She pulled over to sort her next batch of mail, her hands moving through the familiar motions that had become second nature after Colby's disappearance. The investigation had gone nowhere. No body, no evidence, just a cold case that seemed to slip further away with each passing month. Irena tried to continue with her studies, but the stress and grief overwhelmed her. Eventually, she dropped out of college, took a full-time position at USPS, and settled into a routine that felt more like sleepwalking through life than actually living. As she reached for the ignition to continue her route, the radio buzzed again. "Irene, need you to call base immediately. Use the payphone at the Chevron on 5th, her supervisor, Jim Hendris, instructed. It was an odd request. Drivers were never asked to call in unless something was wrong. Irena's hands trembled slightly as she drove to the gas station, aware of the weight of the moment. The payphone receiver felt oddly heavy in her hand as she dialed. Jim answered on the first ring. "Irene, listen carefully," he said, his voice more somber than usual. "We just got a call from the police. They found a USPS bicycle in the city canal. They think it might be connected to Colby's case." The world tilted beneath Irena. She gripped the payphone's metal frame to steady herself. "What? Where?" she asked, her voice tight. "The North Canal near the Expressway 83 overpass. City workers were draining it for maintenance. One of them spotted the bike and called it in. The detectives want you there. I'll meet you at the scene." The drive to the canal felt like a blur. One moment she was at the gas station, and the next, she was pulling up to the scene where yellow police tape cordoned off a section of the concrete embankment. Jim's truck was already there, alongside 2 police cruisers and an unmarked sedan she recognized as belonging to Detective Ray Ua, the same detective who had handled Colby's case all those years ago. Jim met Irena as she stepped out of her truck. His face, weathered with time and worry, betrayed the strain of the moment. "The detectives asked for you specifically when they realized the connection," he said, leading her toward the water's edge. There, standing with a city worker in a yellow safety vest, was Detective Ua. The years had taken their toll on him too, with streaks of gray now threading through his hair, but his eyes were still sharp as they met hers. "Ms. Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." The worker, Marcus Chen, began explaining what he had found. "We started draining the canal at dawn. When the water level dropped enough, I noticed something blue sticking out of the mud. At first I thought it was trash, but when I got closer, I saw it was a bicycle. That's when I noticed the USPS markings, and I figured it might be stolen, so I called it in. Irina's throat tightened as she fought to keep composure. "Can I see it?" she asked. Detective Ua nodded, and they led her down the sloped embankment. The canal was mostly dry now, with just murky puddles and years of accumulated silt. A forensics team in white coveralls worked around the bike that had been pulled from the muck. Despite their efforts to clean off the worst of the mud, Irina recognized the standard USPS bicycle frame and the familiar mail baskets. "The forensics team has already processed it," Detective Ua said, his voice soft but matter-of-fact. "Any fingerprints or DNA evidence would have been destroyed by the water exposure." The discovery left Irina standing on the edge of a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face, a truth that would forever change the way she saw the past 7 years. "Did you call Robbie?" Irene asked suddenly. "Robbie Delgado?" Detective Ua responded. "He was Colby's boyfriend?" "Yes. We have his number from the original file. Left a message at his home and work. He should be on his way." Just as if summoned by his name, Irene heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to see Robbie walking down the embankment, still in his auto shop coveralls. 7 years had changed him. His face was fuller, his hair receding slightly, but his eyes still held the same pain Irene felt every day. "Irene," Robbie said, slightly out of breath. "Jim called the shop, told me." "Is it really—" Detective Ua stepped forward. "Mr. Delgado, thank you for coming. We're still investigating, but we have reason to believe this bicycle may be connected to Colby Martinez's disappearance." Robbie stared at the bike, his face draining of color. "That's a USPS bike, all right, but how can you be sure it's hers? Don't they all look the same?" His voice faltered. "Without personal identification or intact forensic evidence, we can't be 100% certain yet," the detective admitted. "We're checking with the traffic department for any surveillance footage from this area from that time period. The city had just installed cameras at the major intersections in '97. We're also pulling Colby's case file for review." 7 years underwater, Robbie murmured quietly, shaking his head. "Jesus." "I'll keep you both updated as we learn more," Detective Ua said. "This is just the beginning. Finding the bicycle doesn't tell us what happened, but it's the first real lead we've had." Jim approached Irene as the detective moved away to confer with the forensics team. "Irene, why don't you take some time off, a few days at least? I'll handle your route, get Martinez to cover." Irene nodded numbly. "Yeah, I think I need that. Thanks, Jim. I'll drive the truck back to the depot for you. You got your car there?" "Yes, I can manage." She glanced at Robbie, who was still staring at the bike as though it were some cruel ghost of the past. "Robbie, you okay?" she asked gently. He startled, as though remembering where he was. "Sorry, it's been so long. I almost convinced myself she just left, started over somewhere. Seeing this makes it real. That something bad happened." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the forensics team carefully load the bicycle into an evidence van. 7 years of not knowing, and now this. Irene wasn't sure if it was better or worse than the complete absence of clues they'd had before. "We should talk," Robbie said finally. "It's been a while since we really talked. Maybe we can help each other through whatever comes next." Irene studied his face. They'd drifted apart after Colby's disappearance, each dealing with their grief in their own way. "Most of Colby's things are still at your house, aren't they?" Irene asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yeah," Robbie replied, his voice rough. "She pretty much moved in before. I kept everything. Couldn't bring myself to. But now, I think maybe you should take it. I need to move on, Irene. It's been killing me living with all her stuff around, being reminded every day." Irene felt a flash of anger, but she pushed it down. Everyone grieved differently. "I understand. I'll come by after I get my car from the depot," she said softly. "I'll head home now, start getting things together," Robbie said. He glanced at the canal once more before looking back at her. "I'm glad they called you. Colby would have wanted you here." As Robbie climbed back up the embankment, Irene turned to Jim. "I'm going to drop the van off and get my car. Tell Detective Ua I'll be available on my home phone if he needs anything." "Will do," Jim replied. "Take care of yourself, Irene." Irene climbed into the USPS truck, the familiar motion of starting the engine feeling surreal after the morning's events. The streets blurred past as she drove back to the depot, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. At the depot, she parked the truck. Jim was already there, waiting by his truck as promised. She handed him the keys to the delivery van with a grateful nod. "Take all the time you need," Jim said again, his weathered hand briefly squeezing her shoulder. "We've got you covered." In the employee locker room, Irene changed out of her blue USPS uniform, hanging it carefully in her locker as she did every day. The normalcy of the action felt jarring after the morning's revelation. She pulled on her jeans and a simple t-shirt, grabbed her purse and headed to her car, a well-worn 2001 Honda Civic that had seen better days but still ran reliably. The drive to Robbie's house took her through familiar neighborhoods on the east side of town. She'd made this trip countless times in the months after Colby disappeared, leaning on Robbie in their shared grief. But as time passed, the visits had grown less frequent, until they stopped altogether, maybe 2 years ago. Robbie's small ranch-style house looked the same as she remembered: white stucco walls, a red tile roof, a front yard in need of mowing. His work truck was in the driveway, Delgado Auto Repair, painted on the side in fading blue letters. Irene parked behind it and took a deep breath before getting out. The front door opened before she could knock. Robbie had changed out of his coveralls into jeans and a clean shirt. His hair was damp as though he'd quickly washed up. "That was fast," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Didn't see much point in going home first." Irene stopped short as she entered the living room. Cardboard boxes were stacked near the door, some sealed with tape, others still open. She recognized Colby's handwriting on a few labels: winter clothes, nursing books, baby things. "I've packed some of this months ago and finished with the little left once I got home just now," Robbie explained, running a hand through his hair. "Been meaning to do this for a while. Just never could bring myself to start." Irene knelt beside one of the open boxes, seeing Colby's nursing school textbooks neatly stacked inside. A wave of grief hit her fresh as she thought of all her sister's unrealized dreams. "Thank you for keeping everything," Irene said quietly. "I know it couldn't have been easy." "Yeah, well," Robbie shifted uncomfortably. "Like I said at the canal, it's time. I need to move forward." Irene stood, dusting off her knees. "Speaking of moving forward, what about the private investigator? We always said once we saved enough." She trailed off, studying his face. "We should have enough by now, right?" Robbie's expression grew even more uncomfortable. "About that, I do have my share saved up. It's just, things have changed. I might need that money for other things now." "Other things?" Irene felt her temper flare. What could be more important than finding out what happened to Colby? Before Robbie could answer, they heard a car pull up outside. The front door opened, without a knock, and a woman's voice called out cheerfully, "Honey, I'm home." A woman stepped into the living room and stopped short when she saw Irene. She was maybe 30, with shoulder-length dark hair and pretty features. What made Irene's breath catch was the obvious bump beneath her flowing blouse. 4 months pregnant, maybe 5. "Oh," the woman said, her smile faltering slightly. "I didn't know we had company." Robbie looked like he'd been caught in headlights. "Josephine, I didn't expect you today. I thought you were—" "I texted you this morning about moving my stuff," she interrupted. "Remember? Today's the only day I could get my cousin's truck." Josephine looked between Robbie and Irene, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "Right, sorry. I haven't checked my phone since—" Robbie gestured helplessly, his mind still caught up in the chaos of the morning. "Josephine, this is Irene. She's Colby's sister," Robbie said. his voice soft. Josephine's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "Oh, Colby, the USPS driver who went missing. I remember seeing the flyers around town." She placed a protective hand on her belly. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Irene stared at them both, the pieces slowly falling into place. Robbie's reluctance about the money, wanting her to take Colby's things, and now this, a pregnant girlfriend moving in. "So, you're really moving on?" Irene asked slowly, her eyes scanning Robbie's face. "That's why you want me to take her things, and the money you need it for," she added, gesturing vaguely to Josephine's stomach. "Please, Irene, let me explain," Robbie started, but Irene held up a hand. "No need," she said quietly. "I get it. It's been 7 years. That's too much to ask anyone to wait. You deserve to be happy." "We've only been together for a year," Josephine said quickly, as though trying to justify the situation. "I'm just moving in today. It's all pretty new." "It doesn't matter," Irene replied, and to her surprise, she found she meant it. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a dull ache of disappointment, and oddly, understanding. "I should go. I've got all of Colby's things here, and I'll just need to put them in the car now." She headed for the door, but Robbie followed her. "Irene, wait, please." She paused on the front step, turning back to face him. His face was twisted with guilt, and something else, grief that had never fully healed. "Don't," she said quietly. "No explanation needed. I'm shocked, maybe a little disappointed, but that's all. You're doing what most people would do, living your life." "I loved her," Robbie said desperately. "I still love her, but You need to live," Irene finished for him, her voice soft. "I understand." Josephine appeared in the doorway behind Robbie. Honey, I really do need help with my boxes. My cousin needs his truck back by 5. Robbie looked torn, but Josephine was already heading to a pickup truck parked on the street. When she opened the door, Irene could see it was packed, boxes filling the entire back seat and truck bed, stacked so high they threatened to topple. Despite everything, Irene felt a twinge of sympathy. She remembered Colby at 4 months pregnant. How tired she'd get just climbing stairs. "I'll help," Irene heard herself say, closing her car door. "I'm used to handling boxes." "You don't have to," Robbie started, but Irene was already reaching for a medium-sized box that didn't look too heavy. "It's fine," she said, shrugging. "Really?" Robbie asked, surprised. Josephine's hand shot out, stopping Irene. "Oh, not that one," she said quickly, her voice slightly sharp. "Take a different box." Robbie frowned. "What's in it?" Josephine's expression smoothed into something more casual. "Just some old things I'm sending to my mother in Colorado. Stuff from my apartment I don't need here. I was going to ship it." "Irene works for USPS," Robbie explained. "She could take it to the depot for you. Save you a trip." Josephine hesitated, clearly reluctant, but Irene was already lifting the box carefully. "Yeah, I can do that. Save you the trouble of standing in line at the post office." "Okay," Josephine said after a moment. "That would be helpful. Thank you." Irene grabbed a shipping form from her car, always keeping extras for situations like this. "Just fill out the sender and recipient information," she said, passing the form and pen to Josephine. As Josephine filled it out, Irene glanced at the form quickly. She noted the different address for the sender, not Robbie's address. "I'm keeping my apartment for a few more months," Josephine explained, "just in case. You know how it is, moving in together. Want to make sure everything works out." Irene nodded, folding the form and tucking it into her pocket. "Smart. Well, I should get this to the depot. The truck's still on schedule today, so it'll go out tonight instead of sitting in the warehouse." "Don't worry about the rest," Robbie said, already grabbing another box. "I've got it." Irene carried Josephine's package to her car, carefully setting it in the back seat alongside Colby's boxes. As she got into the driver's seat, she saw Robbie and Josephine in her rearview mirror, working together to unload the truck, a couple starting their life together, with a baby on the way. The life Colby should have had. Irene drove away without looking back. Halfway to the USPS depot, Josephine's box still sitting in the back seat alongside Colby's belongings. Irene's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and felt her heart skip. Detective Ray Ua. She pulled into a strip mall parking lot to answer. "Detective Ua," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Ms. Martinez," the detective's voice crackled through. "I have news. We've managed to obtain surveillance footage from 7 years ago." Into the passenger seat of the detective's car, her mind still reeling from the footage they had just watched. The image of Colby's bike sinking into the canal, dumped by the mysterious woman, kept replaying in her mind, each time bringing a new wave of disbelief. Detective Ua slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine. "We'll get answers, Irene. We're closer now than we've ever been." Irene nodded, but the words felt hollow. She wanted to believe him, to hope that after 7 years of silence, the truth would finally come to light. But the doubts gnawed at her. Who was the woman in the hoodie? Why did she dump Colby's bike in the canal? And most pressing of all, where was Colby? The drive to Industrial Boulevard was short, but it felt like an eternity to Irene. As they neared the area, she could see the familiar row of businesses lining the street. The industrial buildings were weathered and dull, most of them looking abandoned or under renovation. The detective pulled into a parking lot near the address Officer Torres had identified, and Irene's heart pounded as they got out of the car. "Stay here, Irene," Detective Ua said, as he stepped toward the building. "I'll be right back. Just need to get a look inside." Irene watched him walk toward the entrance, her fingers gripping the door handle, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. This building, this place where Colby had disappeared, it all felt like a dead end. Minutes later, Detective Ua returned, his face hardening as he approached her car. "We need to talk." Irene's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "The building is empty now, but it's been abandoned for years," he said, his voice low. "But we did find something." "What?" Irene asked urgently. "A small security office inside the building. Looks like it was used as a temporary headquarters for construction workers a long time ago. There was a locked drawer inside. Inside, we found old files. One of them had Colby's name on it." Irene's breath caught in her throat. "What? How could—" "We're still going through the files," he interrupted, "but it looks like someone was watching her. Someone knew her route. They knew exactly when she'd be there." Irene's pulse quickened. But why? Who would do this? Who would have been tracking her? Detective Ua shook his head. "That's what we need to figure out. And I think I have an idea. We need to talk to the people who worked here, anyone who might have been around back then." Irene stared at the building, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. Colby had been tracked, had been watched, and now someone had taken her, dumped her bike in the canal. But where was Colby? What had really happened to her? "I'll do whatever it takes to find out," Irene said firmly. "Just tell me what I can do." "We'll need to canvass the area," Ua said. "Talk to anyone who might know something, even after all this time. I'll need your help, Irene. I'll need you to keep your eyes open. This is far from over." Irene nodded, her resolve hardening. The search for answers had just begun, and this time, they wouldn't stop until they found the truth. "Information?" Dolores hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I have her contact details, but she's usually at work during the day. She works at a local diner." "Can you give us her number?" Detective Ua asked. Dolores complied, pulling a small notepad from her desk. She scribbled the number down and handed it to him. "I just don't understand why you're so interested in her, though. She's such a quiet, hard-working girl." "I understand," the detective said, taking the note. "But we need to ask her a few questions. Please stay here while we work, Ms. Dolores." With that, Detective Ua and Officer Mendez left the cramped office, leaving Irene standing in the hallway. The silence pressed in on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to something dark, something that had been hidden for far too long. Irene's fingers tightened around the package she still clutched. The sender's address had led them here, to the building where Colby had last been seen alive, and now Josephine's connection to it felt impossible to ignore. Was she involved in Colby's disappearance? And if so, why had she gone to such lengths to cover her tracks? Irene's mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. She had known Josephine for such a short time, but the more she thought about it, the more pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit too perfectly. Josephine moving in with Robbie, the address on the package, and now the suspicious connection between her and the building where Colby had vanished. As Irene stood there, her thoughts were interrupted by Detective Ua, returning with a grim expression on his face. "We're going to need that warrant sooner rather than later," he said, walking past her without looking back. "Stay here, Irene. Don't go anywhere. We'll update you soon." Irene nodded, her stomach in knots. She stayed rooted to the spot, watching the detective and officer disappear into the depths of the building. Her gaze drifted back to the old building, its faded beige stucco and empty balconies suddenly feeling much more menacing than they had before. She thought of Colby, the sister she'd lost, and how every step they took now seemed to pull them deeper into a web of secrets that may have been hiding in plain sight all along. Irene's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the tension. She pulled it out, relieved to see it was a message from Robbie. "Irene, I know this is a lot to process, but I want to be honest with you. There's so much you don't know yet. When the time is right, I'll explain everything. Please." Irene's heart sank. The message seemed out of place, too vague to be comforting. She didn't have time to dwell on it now, not with everything going on. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, feeling the weight of the unanswered questions settle heavily on her chest. Irene's heart pounded as she followed Detective Ua's car, trying to make sense of everything. Josephine, Robbie's pregnant girlfriend, seemed to be at the center of a web she hadn't even known existed. She couldn't reconcile the Josephine she'd met, sweet, nervous, and eager to start a family, with the woman who might be connected to Colby's disappearance. The unanswered questions kept swirling in her mind, but one thing was clear: they were running out of time. As they pulled up to the Valley Women's Health Center, the clinic appeared unassuming, with its modern design and desert landscaping offering no clue to the tension building just moments before. The parking lot was half full, with a few cars scattered in front of the building. Detective Ua parked quickly, and they all got out of their cars in unison. Irene stayed close behind the detective, her heart racing with every step. "This is it," Detective Ua said, his voice steady despite the urgency in his eyes. "We need to get inside before they leave." They moved quickly to the entrance, but as they approached the doors, Irene hesitated, her eyes scanning the parking lot. She knew that they were so close to the truth, but part of her was terrified about what they might uncover. What if Josephine was somehow involved? What if she was hiding something that could finally explain Colby's disappearance? As they entered the clinic, the receptionist, a young woman in scrubs, looked up from her computer screen, her expression neutral. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. "We're looking for a Josephine Miller," Detective Ua said, showing his badge. "She's scheduled for a 3:30 p.m. appointment. We need to speak with her." The receptionist glanced at her computer screen, then nodded. "Yes, she's in the waiting area. Just a moment." She picked up the phone, speaking briefly to someone on the other end. When she hung up, she looked at them and gestured toward the waiting area at the back of the clinic. "She's right through there. If you'd like, I can let her know you're here." "We'll take it from here," Detective Ua replied, moving past her toward the waiting area. Irene's stomach tightened. She could see Josephine sitting by herself, her hands resting gently on her swollen belly, her face pale as she glanced up from a magazine. The moment Josephine saw them, her eyes widened in shock, her expression changing from calm to panic in an instant. Before anyone could speak, Josephine jumped up, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear. "Is everything okay? Why are you here?" Detective Ua held up a hand, signaling to Irene to stay back. He addressed Josephine in a calm but firm tone. "We need to speak with you about a matter involving Colby Martinez. We have reason to believe you may have information that can help us understand what happened to her." Josephine's eyes flickered with confusion and something else. Fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, but her voice trembled. I'm just here for my appointment." "We need to ask you some questions," Detective Ua pressed, stepping closer. "Can you tell us where you were on the afternoon of November 8, 1997? Irene's breath caught in her throat. She watched as Josephine's face went ashen, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse tighter. The guilt was palpable, and Irene felt the weight of the moment press in on her chest. Josephine stammered, her voice faltering as she took a step back. "I don't know what you think Ms. Miller, you're not in trouble," Detective Ua said, his tone softening. "We just need to understand what happened that day. We know you lived at 4782 Industrial Boulevard at the time, and we've seen footage that connects you to a suspicious incident." Josephine's lips parted in shock, and she glanced around nervously, as if considering running. But there was nowhere to go. The clinic's waiting area was small, and the officers flanking her entrance made it impossible to escape. "Why don't you take a seat?" Detective Ua suggested, his voice calm but insistent. "We're not here to accuse you, Josephine. We're trying to find out what happened to Colby, and we believe you can help us." Josephine didn't move for a moment, her eyes darting between the detective and Irene. Then, with a resigned sigh, she sat back down, her hands trembling in her lap. "Okay," she whispered, barely audible. "I'll talk." Irene's heart pounded. Finally, the answers were within reach, but the more she looked at Josephine, the more she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had been hiding something, and now they were finally going to find out what. But as Josephine began to speak, Irene knew that the truth might be far darker than she ever imagined. Into the house, pushing Irene aside as they moved to Josephine, who was still gasping for air, her face pale and bloodshot. One of the paramedics quickly started checking her vitals while another moved to Robbie, still unconscious on the floor. Irene stepped back, her mind reeling, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. A police officer entered behind the paramedics, followed by Detective Ua, who scanned the room with a sharp, calculating look. "Irene," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Irene muttered, her gaze fixed on Josephine as the paramedics worked quickly to stabilize her. What happened? Why would she—" "We'll figure that out," Ua interrupted, kneeling beside Robbie. He checked his pulse before standing back up and gesturing for one of the paramedics to assist. "It looks like she tried to take them both out. Overdose on him, a suicide attempt for her." His eyes lingered on Josephine's hands, still clutching her throat. "But that note? We need to investigate this further. We need to know who left it." Irene felt a chill spread through her as she recalled the words on the paper. "You'll spend the rest of your pathetic life wondering and hurting, just like I did every night." The hate, the venom, the intent to make someone suffer. It was all so personal. A few moments later, the paramedics successfully stabilized Josephine. They moved her onto a stretcher, securing her with gentle care. "She'll be okay," one of the paramedics said to Irene, who nodded numbly. Detective Ua turned to Irene, his face thoughtful. "I know this is a lot to process, but I need to ask you something. Do you think Josephine knew something about Colby's disappearance? Was there anything unusual in your conversations with her?" Irene swallowed hard, her mind flashing back to their brief conversations. How Josephine had seemed so nervous when she handed her that package, how out of place she had felt moving into Robbie's house, how her story didn't quite add up. "I don't know," she said quietly, shaking her head. "I never thought she'd be involved, but now, this changes everything." Ua nodded, his jaw clenched in determination. "We're going to figure this out, Irene. Stay with us." We'll trace everything back. We'll get answers. As the paramedics wheeled Josephine out of the house, Irene stayed rooted to the spot, her mind racing with the implications of what had just unfolded. Her thoughts circled back to Colby, how she had gone missing, how the bike had been dumped, how Josephine was connected to it all. And now, with the note, it was clear. Someone had been playing a dangerous game, pulling strings and trying to bury the truth. But who? As the last of the ambulances and police vehicles left, Irene felt both empty and full of questions, and yet overwhelmed by the uncertainty of what would come next. She glanced at the note on the dresser one more time, her fingers hovering above it, unsure if she wanted to delve deeper into whatever dark secrets it might unlock. But she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. She took a deep breath, wiped away the tears that had been building behind her eyes, and stepped outside to join Detective Ua. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes to find out what happened to Colby." Ua looked at her, his expression one of quiet respect. "We're going to get there, Irene, together." And in that moment, Irene finally felt like they were closer to finding the truth. Dolores looked up at Detective Ua, her face streaked with tears, the weight of her confession crashing down on her. I helped her hide it. We had to make sure no one would find Colby. Josephine, was so frantic she didn't know what to do. So we wrapped her up and we put her in the canal to make it look like an accident. The bicycle, the keys. Josephine kept them as a reminder. She said it was a way of holding on to something that was hers. I never thought it would get this far. Detective Ua stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of grim determination, processing the full horror of Dolores's words. He took a step back, his mind racing. "You let her get away with murder, Dolores. You were complicit in everything that happened after, and now it's all unraveling." "I never meant for this to happen," Dolores whispered, shaking her head, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to protect her. She was so broken, Detective. She had no one, and I was just trying to help." Irene stood motionless, her thoughts a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. Colby, her sister, had been murdered 7 years ago, and no one had known. No one had even suspected that Josephine, who had seemed so harmless, was capable of such a thing. The woman she had spoken to just this morning, the woman who had seemed like a friend, was the same person who had planned Colby's death. The betrayal stung deeper than anything Irene could have imagined. "Why did you do it, Dolores?" Irene asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you let her get away with it? How could you help her cover up a murder?" Dolores buried her face in her hands again, sobbing uncontrollably. She was so desperate, so obsessed with Robbie. She said she deserved him, and I thought maybe if I helped her, if I gave her what she wanted, she'd finally be happy. I never realized the depth of her hatred. I never thought she could kill anyone, especially not Colby. I never thought she'd hurt someone who was just trying to love him. Detective Ua looked at Irene, his face hardening. "This is going to be difficult for you, but we need to take Dolores into custody. She's not going to be able to walk away from this." Irene nodded, her emotions torn in 1,000 directions. She had always wanted justice for Colby, but hearing these revelations, seeing how deep the betrayal ran, made her feel like the ground beneath her had shifted completely. There was no way to fix the past, but now they could at least bring the truth to light. Dolores was led away by officers, still sobbing, her cries echoing through the stark hallway of the apartment building. Irene watched her go, the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down on her. Detective Ua turned to her, his expression softer but still filled with determination. "We'll make sure Josephine is held accountable, Irene. But this is far from over. We need to understand why she did it, why she turned on Colby like that, and we need to find out what else she's hiding." Irene nodded, feeling numb. "I know, Detective. I just want to know. that Colby's name will finally be cleared. I want her to rest in peace." Detective Ua placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm but compassionate. "We're going to do everything we can to make that happen. You're not alone in this, Irene." As Irene walked out of the building, the enormity of the situation slowly started to sink in. They had uncovered a dark truth, but the journey to justice had only just begun. She had so many questions left, so many pieces to put together, but one thing was certain: the fight for Colby's memory was far from over. Detective Ua's voice softened as he looked at Irene. "I know, Ms. Martinez, but to Josephine, that wasn't enough. She couldn't stand the thought of Robbie choosing Colby, and in her mind, it all became about control. She wanted to erase Colby, to make sure that she was the one who ended up with him, no matter the cost." Irene's chest tightened as the detective spoke. Every word felt like a fresh wound. Colby had been more than just a postal worker. She had dreams, ambitions, and so much potential. But to Josephine, that didn't matter. She was willing to destroy everything for the sake of her obsession. Josephine didn't see Colby as a person, but as an obstacle, and that's why she planned it all. She knew Colby's route. She knew exactly where and when to strike. Detective Ua continued, his gaze unwavering. And Dolores, she couldn't stop her. She just wanted to protect Josephine, thinking it would be better if she helped her keep the secret. Irene could feel her hands trembling as she clenched them into fists. Every part of her wanted to scream, to shout at the unfairness of it all. Colby had been a victim of a sick obsession, someone who couldn't understand that love wasn't about possession. It was about respect, trust, and care. But Josephine had twisted all of that into something dark and dangerous. "You said Josephine saw herself as better than Colby," Irene whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "But she wasn't better. Colby was better. She didn't deserve any of this." "No, she didn't," Detective Ua agreed softly, his tone filled with sympathy. "Josephine became consumed by her own jealousy, and that's what led to all of this. But we have everything we need now, Irene. We have her confession from Dolores, the evidence from her apartment, and the urn. We're going to make sure they both face justice." Irene wiped her tears away, her heart heavy but determined. The pain of losing Colby would never go away, but knowing the truth, however horrible, was a step toward justice. It was the one thing she had fought for all these years. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking again. "Thank you for not giving up, for not letting her get away with it." "We don't give up, Irene," Detective Ua said firmly. "Not on people like Colby, and not on you." As the last of the paperwork was completed and the details of the case began to solidify, Irene felt like a small weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they were finally on the path to bringing closure to the nightmare that had haunted her family for 7 long years. They left the interview room, and Detective Ua guided Irene to a side office. "We'll be in touch soon," he said, his voice full of promise. "Just hang in there. You've done everything you could." "I just want Colby to be remembered," Irene said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I want people to know who she really was, not the way Josephine twisted her into something she wasn't." "She'll be remembered, Irene," Detective Ua assured her. "The truth is coming to light now, and that's the most important thing." Irene stood up a little straighter, her heart still heavy, but her resolve stronger than ever. As she walked out of the police station, she knew that the journey for justice was far from over. But now, she wasn't alone in it anymore. She had the truth on her side, and that was the one thing Josephine could never take away from Colby. The silence in the hospital room felt suffocating to Irene, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. As she sat there in the dim light, watching Robbie through the window, she couldn't help but think of Colby, the memories of her sister, The way she smiled, the way she had so much promise, and yet taken too soon in such a brutal, cruel way. The thoughts weighed heavily on her, but there was a small spark of hope buried deep in her heart now. Justice was within reach. They were so close, and even though it would never bring Colby back, it would bring her peace, and in turn, Irene would find a small shred of her own. "I'll wait," Irene whispered again, her voice barely audible, more to herself than anyone else. She didn't know how long it would take, but she would be there. She owed Colby that. She owed it to her sister to see this through, to make sure Josephine never got away with what she'd done. The minutes stretched, as time seemed to slow down in the quiet of the ICU, the steady beep of machines the only sound breaking the stillness. Irene's thoughts wandered back to the package they had found earlier, Colby's uniform, her belongings, and the urn. The sickening reality of it all. Josephine had kept Colby's remains like some twisted memento of her crime. It felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end, and the worst part was that Irene had never seen the signs. She had been so focused on her own life, her classes, her work, and Colby had kept her distance, never mentioning the tension in her relationship with Robbie or the mysterious woman who had slowly wormed her way into their lives. Irene had been blind to it all, and now her sister's life was reduced to a tragic story of jealousy, obsession, and violence. But now at least there was clarity. Irene had the answers, the truth that had been buried for so long, and that was something. The road ahead would be hard, but it was a road that would lead them to justice. The nurse entered the room, checking on Robbie once more, before quietly stepping out again. Irene didn't move, her gaze fixed on the motionless man in the bed. There was still so much to process, so much pain and grief to sort through. But for now, she would stay here, by his side, just as she had promised Colby she would. A long time passed, and the hospital's lights dimmed, signaling the end of the day. Irene never left her seat. She knew that her vigil had only just begun, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Eventually, Robbie would wake up, and when he did, he would have the answers too. And Josephine? She would have to face the consequences of her actions. She would be held accountable for taking Colby's life, for the torment she had caused, and for the lies she had lived. As the hours passed, Irene made her silent vow. No matter how long it took, no matter how painful the road ahead would be, she would make sure that Colby's story was heard, that her sister's life and death would not be forgotten. It wasn't just for her sister, it was for herself too, for the healing she desperately needed. Irene leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Robbie, her resolve solidifying with every passing second. The fight for justice was far from over, but it was a fight that was worth every ounce of strength she had, for Colby, for peace, for the truth.